Hello, welcome to the studio. Katerina Nestorenko. Today we're talking about explosions in Kaliningrad and Tatarstan, main intelligence directorate blowing up Russian substation, and Shahid drone factory, Putin hiding planes in Jakarta, North Korea ramping up trade with Russia, sending fuel and weapons. Iran is ready to give up its nuclear program, but on one condition, that Israel responds. Meanwhile, Russians are using chemical weapons on the front lines. We'll cover all of this in just a few seconds, but right now, please like this video and subscribe to the Ukraine Today channel so you don't lose track of us. Here on YouTube. All right, let's get started. Russia faces fires, explosions, and panic. Ukrainian drones and intelligence agents have launched new strikes against the Kremlin's military machine. It seems like they're scared there. Let's break it all down step by step in Kaliningrad. A fire hit an industrial substation. According to Suspolnitsia, citing sources in Ukrainian intelligence, at 4 a.m. on June 14th, GUR agents drained a coolant from a transformer and then set it on fire. The facility, military facilities of the Russian Federation, were left without power. The damage is estimated at nearly $5 million. Another strike took place in Tatarstan. According to Russian media, at 6:30. In Tatarstan, a carpet alert was declared due to unidentified drones that attacked a factory in the city of Yelaboga. Iranian Shahid drones are assembled there for strikes against Ukraine. The full consequences are still unknown, but the very fact of an attack on such a key facility says a lot.
Looks like the cars are definitely on fire.
Apparently, the attacks by Ukrainian drones and the SBU's Spiderweb special operation targeting Russian airfields have seriously frightened the Kremlin. Let me remind you that recently, the Ukrainian armed forces have destroyed air defense depots and even Russian military aircraft. Now, Putin is moving his strategic bombers as far away as possible, all the way to the far east of the country. To Kamchatka Krai, Jakarta, and the Amur region, our journalists will explain how drone strikes are changing things, the course of the war.
I'm not a coward, but I am afraid. While Kremlin propaganda desperately tries to convince the world that the Ukrainian drone attacks on Russian airfields haven't caused any significant damage to Putin's nuclear triad or Russia's strategic aviation, in reality, the Kremlin is frantically trying to hide what's left of its strategic aviation as securely as possible after the brilliant special operation by the Security Service of Ukraine. Russia has relocated its most valuable military aircraft farther away from Ukraine, to Kamchatka, Jakarta, and the Amur region.
Putin ordered the planes to be hidden. That clown showed up and demanded that bases and airfields be prepared in advance for new weapon systems so they wouldn't, and I quote, be placed in the middle of an open field. By the way, do you know what exactly he plans to prepare these new airfields for? Considering the planes that have burned up part of this nuclear triad, the air component, after Operation Web, pretty soon they'll be able to fit all of them neatly on a single airfield.
And that's not just a figure of speech. In reality, Putin has barely any strategic aviation left that's actually capable of taking to the skies. According to the Telegraph, the Russians have moved at least two of these 160 bomber missile carriers. 6,500 kilometers away from the front line, they were relocated to the remote Anadyr base. To understand just how remote and isolated this place is, it's enough to know that you can only get there by air or by sea, as confirmed by satellite images. The new Old Kremlin strategic airfield is located on the uninhabited Jakarta Peninsula. It's about 660 kilometers from Alaska. It was built back in the Cold War era to protect the USSR from potential attacks by the United States of America. Now, the battered SBU Tupolevs and MiGs are hiding there from Ukrainian drones.
So it turns out that Ukraine, after hearing the statement, Putin, hide your planes, hide in the wheat, hide the tanks you have left. In other words, Ukraine forced them to do this. Russia is now seriously preparing for war across its entire territory.
However, it's not a given that such precautions by Putin will save Russia's strategic aviation. On the contrary, they might backfire on those battered Tupolevs. Most of the Kremlin's aircraft fleet is over 40 years old. The service life of these metal birds is already coming to an end. Because of the lack of modernization and proper maintenance, every flight, especially from a remote airfield, could potentially be the last one for the Kremlin's strategic bombers. Conduct maintenance of TOS 160. It's simply impossible on the outskirts of Arefia. In the end, no matter how much the Kremlin's strategic aviation tries to hide in cracks and remote bases, sooner or later it will have to return to the zone where it can be directly hit by the Ukrainian armed forces.
Well, let's put it this way. The ability to do ongoing repairs and some scheduled maintenance at the main airfields has already been exhausted. A major overhaul is required. All Russian aircraft repair plants for this type of aircraft are located in Diaghilevo, which has already been hit, and in Taganrog, which is even closer to the front line than Diaghilevo. That's it. Only 2 plants are capable of repairing this type of aircraft. If the Russians send them in for repairs, well, most likely with the appearance of our missiles, among other things, they'll have to say goodbye to those planes right there if they send them in for repairs. And just 2 missiles would be enough to dispel any Russian illusions about being able to repair aircraft there.
A new, modern airfield with all the necessary infrastructure could solve this problem. That's exactly what needs to be built. Putin has given instructions to do just that. But all of this is just talk. In reality, no one is actually going to build any military base. There's not the slightest point in doing so. After all, Ukraine could turn it into a pile of twisted concrete at any moment.
Naturally, Putin understands perfectly well that no new airfield. 4 new weapon systems will actually be built, but of course, he has to give the order on camera. So he says, we're going to have these new bases, super powerful, super impressive, with modern weapons, so please make sure you build them with proper protection.
In the end, experts tend to agree that the active redeployment of Russian strategic aviation is nothing more than pointless maneuvers meant for a domestic audience. In this way, Putin is trying to reassure himself and the Russian people who were shocked by the brilliant attack of Ukrainian drones on the airfields. In reality, however, the Russian Air Force suffers much more from this decision than from Ukrainian drones, as they wear out the already extremely limited lifespan of their equipment. Launching massive airstrikes from such a distance will become much more difficult and expensive. And if we remember the Kremlin Air Force's tendency for unauthorized dropping of munitions from under the wing, it's quite possible that the lion's share of Russian missiles will fall, somewhere between Moscow and Chukotka.
While Russia is hiding its planes at the edge of the world, it is strengthening ties with its allies. One of them is North Korea, where Kim Jong-un has just launched a new destroyer. On June 12th, Kim Jong-un and his daughter launched one of the most advanced ships. This is the second. On May 21st, it capsized. Attempt 21 of May. It capsized. In 22 days, they restored it, and now North Korea is celebrating success. Reportedly, this ship can carry anti-ship missiles, air defense systems, and even ballistic missiles with nuclear warheads. Kim Jong-un stated that the new destroyer is compelling evidence, quote, of the rapid transformation of the Northern Fleet, and promised to build 2 more like it within a year. By the way, this destroyer is not just a North Korean project. After the accident, there were rumors that it was Russia that might have helped with its repairs not far from its own borders. And you know, this partnership doesn't surprise me, because in 2024, trade between Moscow and Pyongyang soared to a record $34 million thanks to fuel, food, and weapons. More details about this friendship are in our report.
Cooperation between Russia and North Korea is developing rapidly. Alexander is there. Unfortunately, it's a state matter. The volume of trade between these pariah states reached a record $34 million last year, thanks to fuel supplies and food exports.
Right now, we are practically witnessing live the formation of a new axis of evil, similar to what existed before and during World War II. Only Now, the axis of evil is Moscow. It's Pyongyang, North Korea, and it's Tehran, Iran.
In 2022, the trade turnover was almost $4 million, and since then it has grown nearly tenfold. This is the highest level of trade since the Soviet Union.
Russia is paying large amounts of money and possibly also providing food supplies in exchange for weapons, as well as manpower from North Korea.
North Korea has a communist economic model, so entrepreneurship is forbidden. But in practice, all business there is simply stayed on. Among the main export goods going from Russia to North Korea are food and raw materials.
North Korea is a big problem. Where can they find the necessary amount of food? They have always gotten part of it from China. Partially, by the way, from Western partners as well, who, despite sanctions on certain companies, still supplied goods. Cargill, for example, which is no secret, one of the food giants in the world, provided food products in exchange for some raw materials produced by North Korea. But of course, now that North Korea is providing so much weaponry and so many troops, Russia is requesting food supplies in order to control the situation in the country and, let's say, to prevent hunger riots.
It's worth noting that the supply of raw materials to North Korea is accompanied by violations of UN sanctions, which prohibit the import of petroleum products, exceeding the annual limit of 500,000 barrels. North Korea has been violating this limit for many years, using its fleet of tankers to transport fuel from the Russian port of Vostochny. According to analysts' estimates, more than 1 million barrels of oil were shipped in 2024.
Without a doubt, what Russia is being paid with is food, as we mentioned, but also raw materials, including energy resources, so oil is also part of the transactions. So, in exchange for the manpower that North Korea provides, as well as shells and missiles, Russia is not only supplying food, but is also definitely providing energy resources that are essential for maintaining a stable economy in North Korea. Again, all of this is happening in violation of the sanctions imposed by the UN, which I want to emphasize Russia voted for as a member of the UN Security Council and supported. But, when it becomes inconvenient to follow the rules you voted for, you just forget that you supported them and go ahead and break them.
And of course, Russia provided $20 billion in profit to North Korea through military supplies. With this money, Moscow purchased ammunition and technical support services and also paid for the deployment of North Korean military personnel for the war against Ukraine.
This agreement has greatly strengthened the relationship between these two countries, which is certainly concerning not only for North Korea's adversaries, South Korea and Japan, but also, to some extent, for countries that have good relations with both North Korea and Russia. I mean China, since China has always considered North Korea to be almost a vassal state. Russia, in fact, is also increasingly seen as a state dependent on China. And now we are witnessing the formalization of these relationships.
Some experts believe that the current exchange system between Russia and North Korea resembles a pre-modern trading system, where barter is the main mechanism.
Absolutely. That is, they are not all interested in supporting each other, since they are all rogue states.
It's no coincidence that people are calling this the new evil.
Essentially, these are the new outcasts that have emerged in this world. Accordingly, they need to communicate with each other so that their alliance, as they see it, can prevail. But first and foremost, they need to show the United States that an alliance is being formed specifically against, first and foremost, the United States of America. And when the United States lives under the illusion that if they make a deal with someone from this alliance, it will lead nowhere because they all have the same goal. That goal is to destroy the United States of America.
Simply put, two outcasts, Putin and Kim Jong-un, found each other and joined forces for their own benefit and against other civilized countries.
Meanwhile, another ally of the Russian Federation, Iran, is ready to sign an agreement renouncing nuclear weapons, but insists on retaining the right to peaceful use of nuclear energy. This was stated by Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi. He noted that Iran will stop strikes on Israel if Israel ceases attacks on Iranian territory. Let us recall that the negotiations with Shavamani were cancelled due to the Israeli operation against Iran's nuclear facilities. Meanwhile, another 1,200 bodies, including those of military personnel, have been repatriated to Ukraine under agreements reached in Istanbul. However, on the front lines, Russian forces have become more active in the Donetsk region, advancing near Otrad and Zaporizhia. Assaults have intensified in the Kramatorsk and Torets directions. This was reported by Deep State. Meanwhile, in the Siversk direction, the enemy used chemical weapons against Ukrainian positions. This was reported by the National Guard Brigade Rebesh. Meanwhile, in Belarus, drone aviation units have been established, according to Chief of the General Staff Pavel Muravyko during a meeting with Lukashenko. Muravyko noted that they have become an integral part of the country's military structure. A similar step was previously taken by Putin, who announced the creation of a separate branch of unmanned systems troops in the Russian army, with an emphasis on their rapid development. Details coming up right now.
Putin is creating a new branch of the military made up of UAVs.
The effectiveness of their use is constantly growing. In this regard, I would like to point out that we are now creating unmanned systems forces as a separate branch of the military. Right now, our drone operators are responsible for a significant portion, up to 50%, of the enemy's destroyed and damaged equipment and targets.
Drones are truly changing the course of the war in many ways, both for the Russians and for the Ukrainians. According to the General Staff of Ukraine, losses from the use of FPV drones account for about 70% of personnel casualties. A similar percentage is seen in the losses of armored vehicles.
It should be noted that until recently, the Ukrainian Defense Forces had total superiority in what is called the small airspace. Therefore, accordingly, the casualty rate of Russian servicemen differs from the figures announced by the Russian dictator.
Even though Russia has been using drones since 2022, this field has objectively been developing slowly for them. According to statements from the Russian side itself, Ukrainians are able to use 4 to 6 drones against individual enemy targets, something the Russians, in turn, cannot afford to do.
There is only a draft of the state armament program, and accordingly, the formation of a separate branch of the military, namely the Unmanned Systems Forces. Its formation is expected to be completed in the third quarter of 2025.
At the moment, the Russian armed forces include a separate unmanned aviation brigade called Grom Kaskad and the 7th Separate Reconnaissance and Strike Unmanned Systems Regiment.
They are equipped with drones of 10 different types, mainly Zala drones, including the Lancet, which are Strike UAVs, Orlan 30, Supercam, and FPV drones. So it's quite a serious range of strike capabilities. And we're talking not only about strike drones, including those that use fiber optics, but also about reconnaissance drones.
At first glance, the picture seems pretty good, but of course, this is the usual attempt to pull the wool over Russians' eyes. In reality, Russian officials have found a way to benefit and make money here as well.
For example, the units of the separate drone aviation brigade Grom Kaskad are actually called a majors military unit. What this means is that any citizen of the Russian Federation who has the status of a political figure or is connected to business or political circles can sign a contract with this unit for 3 months and pretend to be actively involved right on the front lines, supposedly taking part in combat. This way, they get the status of a combat veteran and, accordingly, all sorts of financial perks as well as opportunities for career advancement.
Russians are indeed scaling up their use of drones, but as we can see, they're doing it to serve their own interests. The occupiers are trying to improve their situation on the front lines by using FPV drones connected by fiber optic cables, which are invisible to the Ukrainian electronic warfare systems. That means, for now, they have the upper hand.
Ukraine's defense forces and the Ukrainian intelligence community, taking these external challenges into account, are carrying out a comprehensive set of measures to prevent the large-scale production of UAVs and accordingly, the formation of a separate branch of unmanned systems troops.
In addition to striking legitimate military targets on the territory of the Russian Federation, Ukrainians are also developing their own drones, outpacing the Russians and their desire to profit from the war and the deaths of their own citizens, of whom 1 million have already fallen in Ukraine.
All for now. Give this video a like and don't forget to subscribe to our channel, Ukraine Today, so you don't miss our next episodes. See you next time.